Want to welcome our participants. We are waiting for more people to arrive, so we will start in just a few minutes. Great seeing everybody. Well, welcome everyone. It is wonderful seeing you. We've got a great turnout today. Hopefully a lot of interest in this topic. And this was just meant to be a preview of some things coming up for the Acro SEM conference, which I'll talk about. I think a lot of you know me, but I'm Jack Miner. I am the director of the SEM conference, and then my day job is also being vice provost for enrollment management at University of Cincinnati. I want to take a few minutes to introduce or allow our other speakers to introduce themselves. So first up, I'll do Andy Hanna.
Hi, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. What a great crowd. So really looking forward to this session. I'm Andy Hanna. I'm on the analytics faculty at the University of Pittsburgh. I also chair the university's advisory board for responsible data science. About 10 years ago, I started a machine learning and AI company called OThought, which is now partnered with Liaison. And my research has focused on how analytics and data can impact the demographic cliff, the acceleration of public companies into the S&P 500, and how third-party data impacts analytic models. Great to be here.
Thanks, Andy. So next up is Andrew Hahn. Andrew.
Thanks, Jack. My name is Andrew Hahn. I'm the Associate Director for Strategic Enrollment Management, Data, and Storytelling at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I also teach data analytics at the Information School here. That title sounds a little bit whimsical to people when they first hear it, and it's a new role for our institution. And it basically means that I coordinate data teams in the Office of the Registrar, Financial Aid, and Admissions. And I also coordinate the communications teams there as well, and make sure, most importantly, that the data teams and the communications teams are working together. That, for us, is a really important part of our analytics strategy, to make sure that we can communicate the insights that we're generating. And it's a good fit for me. I love my work. My background is in journalism. And so I'm excited to be back in an enrollment management context.
Thanks, Andrew. Next up, David Barron. David.
Hi, I'm David Barron. I'm the Vice President of Enrollment Management here at the University of Texas at Tyler. So I'm over undergraduate, graduate admissions, recruitment, financial aid, registrar, one-stop shop, all that fun stuff. On top of that, I'm also the chair of our data governance committee for the university. So I have a lot of opportunity, I think, to work with AI in our institution and help guide that as we move forward.
And last but certainly not least, a familiar face for many of you as well, Mike Simmons from the Acro office. Mike.
Thank you, Jack, and everyone. Appreciate you being here on this afternoon, and appreciate the panelists for helping Acro with a topic that is expanding by the moment. And hopefully by the end of this hour, we'll have expanded. For you, my role at Acro is I have business development and strategic partnerships, which includes things like our Acro consulting unit. Several of those have joined us today, I see. Our corporate partnerships, our grants, and then the other duties as assigned. So I'm happy to be here representing Acro.
Thanks, Mike. So I mentioned earlier that this is not just a webinar on AI and machine learning, but also a little bit of an opportunity to give you a preview of some of the things that will be happening and that we'll talk about at the SEM conference in November. So this will be a little bit of a primer, but the folks that are here today are also all presenting. Some of them will actually talk about some of the things that they'll be sharing more in depth. So hopefully this is a little bit of a preview and will get you a little excited about some of the things that we have to offer in SIM. But to start with, I'm going to start with Mike Simmons. So Mike, AI can be kind of a catch-all term. So can you help define artificial intelligence and machine learning and talk a little bit about how it's getting used currently in higher education?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I'm going to aim low here because the experts on this panel will be able to run circles around me because of their work. But that's basically what we're talking about today is AI is basically the use of computers to try and simulate what goes on in here. That's the general premise behind AI. And machine learning is just the manipulation of data through algorithms. And there are nuances and millions of other ways to describe it. But that's generally the gist of it. And what's exciting, and you're going to hear from the folks today, is how it actually is being used in higher ed. But let me just give you some sort of general categories, and maybe you can identify with these, or maybe you don't know that it's happening here. But obviously administrative type work, and by that I mean personal administrative work, help with your writing, help with your emails, that kind of stuff. And administrative work writ large at institutions, some of the larger functions, and you'll hear about those from these folks. Tutoring, course development, grading, assessment, student support through chatbots, advising, research. We see instances of it being used for accessibility and inclusion initiatives. What's another one? Predictive analytics, which I think some of our friends here will talk about. Those are some of the main ways that we're seeing it in the world that ACRO touches. And what our role is, just real quick, is we're never going to know it all. Our role is to sort of inventory, promote, and point. And so today, with Jack's help, we're pointing you to these folks who are doing work, and at the conference, we'll be pointing you to a bunch of other folks who are doing work. And that's the best way, in our opinion, to understand AI, is to see what someone else is doing and learn from them.
Actually open that up a little bit to the other panelists. Can you talk a little bit about how you're seeing colleagues or your institution or others using AI and machine learning, especially when it comes to enrollment management? So who wants to jump in first? I'll put David on the spot.
Sure, I can talk about what we're doing here. So one thing that we're doing is dipping our toe in the water, so to speak, but we're looking at transcript evaluation and implementation, or onboarding for the transcripts. We had a unique problem in our area where our largest feeder school, which was a junior college, been here 150 years, uses a transcript format that no OCR can read. And so all the transcripts that come through, we've had to manually process. So part of that, we're using an AI tool that has machine vision, or computer vision, machine learning, that can view the transcript rather than look at OCR fields, the whole transcripts, and it can bring that over. We're looking at implementing that, as well as algorithm calculations. A big part of our graduate programs use the last 60 hours of your undergraduate degree. Guess what? That's nowhere on a transcript, right? So we're using a vendor to help provide machine learning that can calculate that as soon as it sees the transcript. And so that'll populate in our system. We can evaluate people quicker. We can get them in. So that's just a piece of what we're doing. We're looking at using that algorithm process to integrate eventually with a chat bot, where a student can take a picture of their transcript forward facing. So currently, we don't even evaluate transcripts until they apply, which is not transfer friendly. But we don't do that because we have to have their application and transcripts review. But we want a forward facing piece where they can take a picture of their transcript, say what major they want, and then the chatbot will spit out what of those courses transfer into our program. So some amazing forward-facing things that are going to really help students onboard quicker and choose us as an institution to go to and in their search, right? So if we can admit them first, then they're more likely to come to our institution.
So with Andrew and Andy, kind of what are some of the things that you guys are seeing, especially colleagues do? I'm going to come back in a minute to some of the things that you're doing and specifically within your presentation, but kind of what are some other things that you're seeing in the marketplace?
Well, I think you see two different types of AI applications. One is on the generative AI side. That's on where organizations are using that for creating content, for delivering that content in a more human sort of way so that you can interact with students. And that's awesome when we think about how we can best interact with them. Then there's the machine learning side. And the machine learning side is really the decision-making process. So you can sort of think about generative AI as a creative side and machine learning as a decision-making side. So what we're seeing is people using the machine learning to understand student behavior and predicting whether or not they might enroll, whether or not they're going to persist to sophomore year, whether or not they're going to graduate. So this machine learning, which I'll talk a little bit about when I talk about my session, allows us to understand student behavior and predict an outcome.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's a helpful distinction to make between sort of these the vendors that are providing sort of language models, generative language models that is used for, you know, business use cases that are not super dissimilar from any other business, chatbots, drafting copy text and things like that, versus sort of the challenges that are unique to higher education, like David shared about transfer credit evaluation. Those require a lot more infrastructure and a lot more like sort of ethical and security guardrails on what we're doing. And so we're pursuing them on our campus very carefully and cautiously and with public data first. So for example, we're trying to read and query unstructured PDF data for our own historical records and for common data set reports for peer institutions as a way to sort of like try to figure out what exactly infrastructure wise we can get set up to make sure we're in a better place when we do expose our student data to these things down the line. Those are sort of, for us anyway, on the horizon questions that we have to be very careful about pursuing because of those concerns. So those use cases are like the often talked about use cases that we get asked about constantly, and we need an approach to them, but we have to be cautious about how we implement them. So some of the same things that that we're thinking about that others have already mentioned, recruitment and yield efforts, predicting emerging student markets and markets for recruitment. This category also includes things like predicting retention and on-time graduation and student success measures, which some schools, especially smaller schools, more centralized schools, have had some success with already.
So Andy, you made reference to your presentation, and yours was specifically using AI as part of your recruitment process. So talk through the examples of what you're doing and what you'll be sharing as part of the SEM conference with your presentation.
Sure. So over the past 10 years, I had mentioned in my opening that I co-founded a company called OTHOT, which is our whole purpose was to help institutions enroll students into their schools and also to graduate more of them and accelerate that 4-year graduation rate. So that's where we started, and we said, okay, well, what can we do with data? We can understand who people are and how they behave. And so what we learned through that process was that everybody has something that's more important to them than other things. So some are motivated by money, some are motivated by status, some are motivated by relationships, and the data and how we understand that data helps us understand who they are. So with that knowledge, we can do two things. We can fill the top of our funnel with students who would fit with our institution, and then we can communicate better, understand how we can provide them more information or perhaps more money if that's what's important to them, to actually enroll them at the when it comes time to enroll, to yield. And one of the examples that we've been working on, or what I've been personally working on a lot, is how do we use advanced analytics to identify individuals who have partial credit but no degree, and how can we identify um, their desire to go back and achieve a degree or additional education, and then we can start to engage them in order to bring them into our funnel and hopefully yield them. So all this is done through data, analytics, and AI, in those three, in that order, because you don't necessarily need AI to do certain things, which I'll talk about in my session. It's that analytics engine that really drives a lot of this, a lot of these decision-making opportunities.
So I'm actually a bit of a convert for the technology that you created. So I'm a customer as well, of the product that you helped develop. And I think one of the things that was really powerful for me that I want you to talk about a little bit more is essentially what we've been able to use the data analytics for is really to drive our actions in ways where we have very limited resources. And a really good example, you talked about the scenario of a student being able to offer a student more money. Well, we can always assume that students want more money, but one of the things that I feel like OTHOT's really been able to help us with is determining the scenario when we're really leveraging what is just the right amount of money to be offering a student, so we're not over rewarding. And then similarly, it's really helped us drive some of our recruitment and yield actions. So really to think about within students that fit a certain profile, what are the interactions? So is it another campus visit? Is it an outreach from a faculty member or from a dean that's really going to make a difference for that student? So kind of talk about some of those things kind of in the kind of rubber hits the road of how you have been able to see schools use that data to drive action.
Well, thank you, Jack. Yeah, I mean, you do it better than I do. That's a great description. But again, going back to sort of understanding that all students are motivated by something different, one of the first things that we learned about is that just giving additional dollars doesn't have the impact that you think it would. And we have an example of a university that we worked with that was targeting a particular group of students with money. We got to give them more money. We got to give them more money. And the models were saying, well, no, relationship is much more important to these individuals. If you pay for a voucher for them to come onto campus, you pay for their transportation, you're going to yield more of them. The first year, they did not believe that. And then we convinced them the second year that that's the model was telling them about that group of students. And they actually yielded a significant number more because the models are able to understand what's important to the student. And not only that, it gets to sort of a refinement of, everybody knows that being on campus has a big impact for them coming on campus, but which events, so there's, schools have lots of different events that you can come to. The models can understand what's going to impact that individual the most, which of those events. So it's almost like shuttling them into the right categories in order to get them to be engaged. So that's just, I can go on for like days on this. So I appreciate that. I mean, come to the session, I'll talk about it more, but the price sensitivity piece is really important. Just like everybody here, is sensitive to pricing for like airlines, you can understand how important money is to individuals by the data and how they behave. Somebody spends a lot of time on the financial aid section of your website. Guess what? That money is really important to them, as opposed to somebody who just says it, but doesn't spend any time on that website. So that's just a couple examples. Thanks for letting me do that, Jack. I apologize for taking up so much time.
So David, your use case and kind of what you're sharing is actually a little bit broader because you're really looking at the entire student life cycle. So talk a little bit about some of the examples that you're doing that really looks at the student life cycle as well as student success.
Sure. For our segment, we're going to talk a little bit about AI as the ethereal, but really going to talk about what is AI, what can it do for you now, right? And so we're going to look at some different products. And I say products, I'm not a vendor, I don't hawk a vendor, but I'm going to look at different things that are out there in the market, right? That may be able to utilize for you, for different schools, for different purposes, whether that be an AI analytics tool that sits on top of your CRM and uses your CRM data for you to have a LLM log, that you can ask questions of and it generate information. Or you're using more of an algorithmic machine learning that, like the transcript processing, that you can help move that forward. And so we're going to look at the admission process, whether it be reading, right? Reading applications, right? Using that large language model for that. And there are obviously, as Andrew Hahn mentioned, some ethical considerations for that based on the output for that, but there are some things that will do reading of your transcripts. There is the predictive analytics, right? Looking at your populations through the algorithmic piece to see what's going to yield or who's going to yield based on what's offered or what the connection, number of visits to college, and targeting those students or utilizing your resources more effectively, right, for those students. But then we're going to talk about the onboarding process, whether it be transcripts, whether it be backmen, right? Reading that information, filling it out, taking those mundane tasks that take people time to input, to get people through and students through, to automate that through the use of AI as well. And then there's building affinity, right? And so that yield and connection through AI, a chatbot, through groups, adaptive chatbots that are going to listen to what you're saying right in the chatbot, and they're going to adapt the questions or adapt the information based on what they feel you're trying to get to versus the questions you ask directly. And so helping steer that student in the right direction for the things that they need. Then going to, after the student is admitted, looking at what is out there for tutoring, right? Adaptive tutoring that can help students master a certain area that they're not successful in. They're going to look at them, look at the evaluation of the questions they're answering. If they're answering them wrong, they're going to get the question bank and provide the information on that topic area to help them master that. And once they've mastered it, it can move on to a different area of study and help them be successful. Looking at analytics to help you identify students that are in trouble. As we know, we have all kind of early alert systems and we have things, but yes, people have to process that. They have to look through it. They have to look at the grades and what's the first grade they made and evaluate that. Well, if you have an AI that tells you, here are the 5 points of intersect that says this student's in trouble, you need to reach out now. That's going to help you retain those students and help them be successful in the long run. Not to mention generative AI, right? Content, whether it be for faculty and course development, whether it be for research and providing proposals. There's AI even in grant writing. So there's lots of different pieces that generative AI can be used for as well. To help them move in the right direction and help your university be successful and more efficient in what they're doing in their operations.
Thanks. So Andrew, our universities are about the same size. I think you're about 49,000 students. I think I'm at 51 or 52,000 this year, depending on how the wind blows over the next couple of days. So it can be tough to scale. And to really think about how do you use some of these tools at an enterprise level. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I also want you to talk a little bit about the storyteller piece of your role, because one of the things that I think you've got in Wisconsin that's really kind of a great way to leverage AI and machine learning tools is that opportunity to be able to use the data in a way that you're leveraging decisions off of it. And I think that storyteller role really helps with that. So kind of talk about the scaling and talk about your connection for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the model at the center of a machine learning initiative or an AI initiative gets all the attention. It's the shiny object that our leadership is really excited about. What can it predict? How good can it predict it? What are the limitations of its predictions? But to actually embed that into the day-to-day practice of enrollment management takes an infrastructure much larger than just the code of the model itself. And that's true whether you're using a vendor or whether you're using a homegrown analytical approach inside your department with analysts or in combination with the institutional research team. And so our presentation is going to be about what other components need to be in place for this to be successful. Successful in terms of like model outputs and evaluate, you evaluate your model to be successful, but also to be successful in the sense that it has to actually be useful. It has to be used, and it has to generate insights that your student-facing teams can actually use to make to help students. And so we're going to talk about some of those things, like how do you get leadership to buy into your process and grant you the authority to reorganize those priorities, to put this at the forefront of what you're doing, and grant you, in some cases, you might need policy-making authority. Then you have to get the right people in the room. You have to align your people resources. So we found that it's no longer good enough to just have your data people across campus talk to each other. Now, all of our people are data people. And so data literacy must be a focus of many campus partnerships and cross-functional teams at the same time. And then you have to align your data resources. So the availability and format of the data is really important. This needs to be at the forefront of any data warehouse conversations that you're having or data access conversations that you're having. And then finally, and the piece that I think you're calling out, is that you need a feedback loop to communicate the results of your enterprise. So I've kind of skipped over now in the middle, the math of actually how the model works to talk about this larger ecosystem. But at the end, you need to be able to communicate that output transparently and effectively back up to leadership to demonstrate those results. But also it needs to drive a broader communications strategy with stakeholders that might include legislators and the media and all of these stakeholders who want to know the future as early as possible and as thoroughly as possible. And we can start to answer a broader suite of questions with AI and machine learning enabled tools than we could before. But we do ourselves a disservice if we aren't transparent about the limitations of those tools. And so we need to be very clear about what we can't say about students. And we find some sort of squishy areas where we can give you a number, but whether that number means what it purports to mean needs a little bit of effective communication. And so we need our communications teams to be really embedded in the analytical process to understand where they're coming from. And so finally, I'd argue that that's really the proper order to consider these things in. To start with the people resources, because those people are the keys to the technical resources. And so if you have the people in the right place and empowered with to make this a priority in their day-to-day work, the technical resources can only follow.
Thanks. So Andy, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So as our faculty colleague, as the guy that's more frequently in the classroom than the rest of us, talk about some of the things that you're seeing for classroom applications of AI and machine learning. And I think Mike made reference to this with some grading and other things, but that's really one of the areas we've seen a really blossoming opportunity for use of AI. So Andy.
Yeah, I will start with the core curriculum. So, I mean, one of the things that people may be surprised about, but our first year students in the business school are actually programming with Python. For those of you who don't know Python, Python is a programming language that's often used with analytics type of programs like predictive analytics. And so they're data mining, they're programming, they're doing all this at a first year level because we're preparing them to be able to use these applications as they leave and have their first jobs. So the core curriculum is fundamentally changing to match that. To Andrew's point earlier, we're right now developing a responsible data and data science course so that they understand what could go wrong, what did go wrong, and how do you prevent things from going wrong. So the core curriculum is being developed so that our students can learn these things. We're pushing that out broadly to the university, and that's what part of the Responsible Data Science Initiative at Pitt is about, is to making sure that all of our students in all schools get the same level of education when it comes to these core fundamentals. So that's sort of at a curriculum standpoint. When we dive down into the individuals in the classroom, so for example, my classes, which are, one is a predictive analytics class where we develop models for real world clients, and others around the strategic use of data analytics and AI as they go into business. And so I'm encouraging them. It's very difficult to build machine learning models if you're not doing it like as the core of the course, which I do with the undergraduates. But at the graduate level, what we're encouraging them to do is use generative AI models to develop content, to do research, to communicate with others within the classroom. So it's like mimicking what we would do in terms of communication with a student in the enrollment funnel, but it's like using those tools to be able to do that. The really important piece, and I encourage them actually to use it for their assignments. And but there's a caveat to that, in that they have to use they have to cite their prompts, which is how we use generative AI. So what the prompts are, what the results of the prompts were, and how they audit it to make sure that the content was actually real. And so they're learning sort of that audit process about if I'm going to use these tools, I don't want to wind up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I don't want to, get sued or fired. And there's lots of examples in the real world of that. And then towards the end of the class, we start to talk about how, did any of those models that you used, or any of that content you generated, could it be biased against a particular part of the population? And that's so the number one question that we ask is, who would be disadvantaged by what you did? And so that's how we get to the concept of bias. So we're using it in the classroom, at least I am, in a way that forces them to use it and then to report out on that and to audit that.
So that's actually a really good lead in. You had the classroom examples, but I think that also comes up in the really practical examples that we have too. And I'm gonna toss this back to David first. When you think about the applications and the way that you're using AI and machine learning, what are some of those ethical issues that you really had to think through, and kind of where did you start with that?
Sure. So we know about hallucinations, and not just from AI, but no, with the AIs, the hallucinations that can be originated, even if you have a closed system, right? If you have a secure site that's only using your data, there's still hallucinations that are going to happen. So you have to be mindful of that, right? And, I think of it like monitor an employee. They're not going to be 100% all the time, right? People aren't perfect. Well, AI isn't going to be probably 80% of the time until it builds and learns. And so you have to monitor those pieces as you move forward. A big thing, that was learned early on was through the large language models, that it disadvantages ethnic minorities whose English is not their first language. So when they're doing that with plagiarism or AI detection of plagiarism, it was found out it was disenfranchising those students whose English is not their first language, and saying they were plagiarizing even though they weren't, right? Because of how the model works and the basis of the data that was being used for that plagiarism piece. So for that, it's about understanding the limitations, as Andrew talked about before. It's not 100%. This is an emerging science, right? This is emerging technologies, and we have to realize that. Does it do a lot of things? Absolutely. It's wonderful. It's great. We can implement it to make some things work in a much better way, but we have to be very mindful of how we're using that across the board. Unlike my wife, I don't think that AI is going to rise up and kill us all through the Terminator movies like my wife does, but it's a tool. And the tool has to be used the right way. It has to be maintained the right way in order for it to be effective. And so that comes into ethical considerations as far as the implications, just as you would with any tool or any process that you're doing. And so you've got to do research, you've got to model, you've got to test to make sure that you're getting a true and desired outcome for the institution. I will say this, part of those ethical considerations are affecting politics. So just to be aware, we've had inquiries about legislators as far as what AI is used to make decisions on admission, because they're very interested in the state of Texas. They don't want AI making admission decisions. So with our use, we have to explain, well, they're not making the decision. We're just a tool that helps us, and then we make the decision. But there's some misconceptions, right, of AIs doing all the work and making decisions, and we have to educate folks on how that works. But we also have to manage the political implications if we are using AI and, their daughter didn't get admitted, but somebody else did, they're going to say it's that computer's fault, right? And so we have to have good justification, good documentation, as Andrew was talking about, to show how it's being used and in what way, because there is implicit bias, probably on this more than most issues I've ever seen, because of Hollywood, I guess. I don't know. But there's a lot of concern about AI and the implications, when in reality, it's a tool like any other tool, but it does have to be managed.
And Andy, kind of back to you on the same question. What are the things that you're seeing at Wisconsin that are the same types of issues that you had to struggle with? And what infrastructure from a campus community did you all set up to think about it?
Yeah, Wisconsin, bias and modeling is at the front of our minds with any of these questions, whether we're talking about a vendor or a homegrown approach to machine learning. Even when you exclude demographic information from a model, bias in your data collection or other parts of your system can emerge. And the one way that we're especially worried about that showing up in a way that's harder to detect is just inaccurate results for certain populations, even if it's not included in the model itself. We have implemented some strategies to combat these things at our institution. Our division of enrollment management is lucky to have an embedded research practice partnership called the STAR Lab, Student Success Through Applied Research. So they are in charge of researching access questions in higher education, and they work in close proximity to folks in financial aid and other areas of enrollment management. And that office is really well positioned to provide some model evaluation and ethical guardrails around what we do, and long term, hopefully, to research the impact of that kind of work. We're also worried about the validity of conclusions. So as we've said, some of these tasks, these use cases that we're interested in, involve asking machines to do things that even humans struggle to do. And so if a human can, the best a human can do in some of these cases is to look at a student record and make an educated guess about what their behavior might be. And so an educated guess might be the best, possible outcome of our evaluation, of our analytical evaluation. And so we have to communicate those results with an appropriate degree of uncertainty, while still explaining the value of that analysis despite the uncertainty. And that's a fine line that our communications teams have to walk. And so we're embedding communications teams at every level of our analytical approaches. And then finally, there are obvious data security concerns. So all of us have an added layer of scrutiny because of the student data that we are the stewards of. At our institution, we're lucky to have excellent security and compliance personnel engaged in these discussions. And that can be a blocker at other institutions. One good strategy, as always, is just to engage those people as early as possible so that they're excited about doing this the right way, rather than becoming a roadblock to your success. So those are things that we're thinking about at Wisconsin.
So one of the things that you talked about that I don't want to get lost, that is, I think, really important, is that piece of, I think in AI, I think we're starting to see more partnerships between offices. So it's usually not just enrollment management, it's enrollment management plus institutional research plus other areas of campus. And I think one of the other things we're really seeing a lot of, that I'm really glad you mentioned, is that connection to faculty research and that opportunity to really think about how does this become an enterprise conversation. So for each of you, I mentioned to you actually before we started that, kind of by default, you're doing a session at the Acro SEM conference, you're doing this webinar, you kind of end up being the default expert on a topic, but you had to start somewhere. So kind of talk about how you and your institution really started to kind of dip your toe in the water on AI. And I think one of the other great realizations for folks is how much AI they're already using, how much machine learning they're already using and not necessarily thinking of it that way. And so it can be an intimidating topic, especially if your president is saying, I think David mentioned earlier, you get that conversation with the state of, you need to report up what AI are you doing, and you can't decide, are they trying to ask the question because they think you should be doing more, or they think you should be doing less, and they're afraid that computers are taking over the world. So talk about how you got started, how your institution got started, and kind of how some of the other schools that are listening today get started. I'm going to start with David. I'm going to actually have all of you go through that one. So David.
Sure. So I asked too many questions. And so then I was nominated to be the chair of the data governance committee for the institution. And we were looking at different AI solutions broadly for the institution to utilize. And because we already have a Microsoft 365 contract, we ended up getting Microsoft Copilot free, or, we were paying for it in our licenses that we could use as an institution. We were part of beta for that. And then now it's open to all students for us to use that generative AI piece. So that was really interesting. That was when it was first coming out. So some of the professors were using Chat GPT, and I won't name what sister institution, but one professor uploaded all the research in Chat GPT and lost it because it became property of Chat GPT at that point. So there were some lessons learned for that, no patent for that professor. So some things that happened that we've learned, and Microsoft 360 is a closed system, right? So that's this safe space within we can upload things and it doesn't go away. So that was the beginning, I think, of the AI piece for us. And then it was for me, the charge from our provost, put AI in everything. And it's like, that's not how it works. It doesn't exist by itself. It has to have a vendor, it has to have a function. So we decided to problem solve. We had a problem, where can AI help us? And so we found AI vendor that could help us solve our problem with our transcripts. And so we've employed that and using that to push forward. And we're doing testing. We're not going all in with AI, but we're saying if this is successful, which it is right now, then we'll move on to other pieces that will help us bring that in. But we are reviewing several major initiatives over the next year that will, in my opinion, transform our operation, both in enrollment management, but also in student success and in faculty course development. So lots of opportunity as we move forward. But again, we dipped our toe in the water. We have governance, we have structure, we'll make sure it works, and then we'll move forward on other issues.
Thanks. Andy, how about you? How did you and how did your school get a start?
How I got started was a little bit different. In the 1990s, I joined a company that early on that was mining data out of the former Soviet Union so that could help banks and investors invest more money into those emerging economies. And so I learned about the value of data. In the 2000s, I joined a company that was using statistical models to make conductive polymer molecules. And so that's where I got my data understanding, and then I got my statistical modeling understanding. And in 2014, I was teaching at Carnegie Mellon. I decided to come over to the University of Pittsburgh, where I convinced them that predictive modeling would be important for business use. And so we started with one course, and I wanted to combine that sort of knowledge of the power of data with the statistical modeling, which then turned into machine learning. And then we needed to be able to have an organization that we could work with if I was developing this concept of predictive modeling for business use. And the University of Pittsburgh said, well, why don't we do it at home? And I'm like, what a great idea. So Mark Harding, who is our VP of enrollment there, said, let's work on these models together. And that's how it all started. In terms of it growing through the university, especially in the enrollment management and the student success side, what we started doing was having listening sessions around the university. And we would ask one basic question was, if you could predict something about your area of the university that would help the outcomes for students, what would that be? So that led to understanding what models could be built to have an impact, either in terms of enrollment or recruitment or in terms of student success. And so that's sort of how that was in the I'd say mid 2010s. And now it's a much more mature organization, which I think most universities have a bit more maturity than back in those time periods. I think those listening sessions and framing the questions in terms of what could have an impact if you could predict, thinking about machine learning and predictive modeling, if you could predict something that would benefit the student or get a better outcome, what is it that you would predict? And so you would be amazed at what follows from that. So that would be sort of an idea that some schools may want to think about.
So that is the most unexpected how I got into this answer I have ever had. And now I have 5 different things I want you to talk about at SEM that have nothing to do with SEM. So, Andrew, can I talk about you in your school? I know this is a kind of a fairly new role, so kind of talk about where your background brought you into this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been an investigative reporter and data reporter, newsroom developer at various news organizations in the past. And I've been lucky to work with some of the most innovative and humbly innovative journalists who by necessity are exploring a lot of these technologies without really even understanding the impact of what they're doing and how amazing and innovative it is, because of the pressure in the industry to find stories that no one else is going to find. So a lot of times that looks like just applying any kind of tool you can imagine at a data set to find stories in it, to interrogate it for stories buried in that data. That sometimes that looks like using a lot of open source AI tools, and other times it means really investing in your own statistical education and trying to figure out what you can get out of a data set. This looks a lot of times like you'll get a big boring data set from the city. I've worked on salaries for city employees in the city of Milwaukee. There has to be something there that's interesting, right? And so you interrogate it a million different ways to make sure that the city is being a good steward of funds. And you can apply all kinds of predictive analytics to not necessarily because the prediction is valuable, but because the difference between the prediction and reality is sometimes an interesting conclusion that can lead you to a story. Statistical significance is not a requirement for something to be a story or for it to be news, but it can give a journalist ideas about what kinds of features are important, what kinds of features are stories. And so that's how I fell in love with telling stories with data. And it's an experience that also taught me that I think a little bit of basic statistical education is going to be really important for people at all levels of our institutions in the future. I think Andy's students are really lucky to get that kind of education, and I think we're all going to need to catch up with them in order to keep serving those students in the next 10 years.
Thanks. So Mike and Andrew just talked about the idea of catching up. So give us a little bit of a preview of kind of where you think things are going to go in the next 10 years, and also what's ACRO's role? Kind of where's ACRO really trying to lead the effort and also make sure that the schools are getting the support and the members are getting the support they need?
Sure. And I think these folks have laid the path to common sense. Oh, if this, then that, right? Some of these implications you said, but there's another sort of a larger picture element that I've been thinking about lately, and it's well, 2 of them. One was sort of has to do with relationship. And I can't remember, David, maybe you mentioned it, but the relationship across units, across individuals, and the nature that the work is going to change, and the role that individuals play in the work is going to change. And so it changes the whole organizational dynamic. So if you're a student of that's not a technology question, but it's driven by technology. It's going to change the nature of the work. And that's not the same as everybody's out of a job. It just simply means the tasks and functions are changed in some way. And at an institution of higher education, that's probably going to be more difficult than some other places. I think the other thing is, I hope everyone would agree with me that students and vendors will always be out in front of institutions on this particular topic. I don't see in the next 10 years institutions keeping up with what students will be doing and what vendors will be doing. And maybe that's not a bad thing. It's just an acknowledgement. That doesn't always happen. But in this case, I think it's pretty clear. And so an institution may just have to reconcile itself to say, we've got to, students have to be more involved interactively, and our vendors, we've got to rely on vendors because we cannot invest to possibly keep up on this. And I don't know. And Andy, I don't know what you think about that as a provider, but I can't imagine an institution having the kind of ability to keep pace with the work you're doing, for example. So those are a couple of things. And finally, just a real quick one that plays off the first one. If you think about it, this pace of change that's possible is going to change things like governance. And that, to me, is one of the biggest threats. That's not AI in and of itself. It's the result of AI and the processes and conversations and data we have. Because in things like governance, faculty governance, that's not a fast process. It's not designed to be fast. Yet, these things we're talking about are designed to be fast and make things faster. So that notion of speed versus governance and process, I think, is going to be an inherent conflict that results from AI. So those are just some big picture thoughts. But in terms of ACRO, just a few practical things. We're doing things like this, and you'll see an increasing number of sessions at all of our meetings, obviously, because it's a topic that is. And so you've got people like this who can talk about it. And I think we're all, really happy to have them talk. ACRO doesn't need to talk about it because we've got our members and our partners doing it. Additional webinars, community practice starting in exchange, related to AI and technology topics, so that there can be a peer-to-peer conversation. I think Belva and her colleagues will be expanding the curriculum and courses available at ACRO on these topics, and whether they're short courses or more extended certifications in it. We've got a vendor demo day coming up in October, in which we will be highlighting AI vendors as a sort of a show and tell for them. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, we're trying to take an around the corner perspective. In other words, okay, what we've talked about today, you can sort of see. And ACRO's role is to look next, what's around the corner from what we've talked about today. Okay, we see what's happening, but can we as an association work with our colleagues and institutions to prepare for that next step? And I think that's the challenge we face. But I want to say thank you to you all for this excellent information. I've learned stuff already today that I hadn't thought of, and we look forward to having you at the sessions. And Jack, I think there'll be a number more sessions than just these represented here. I can't remember the number, but you said it might be 1 million or something, right? Something like that. Yeah.
Well, and I think David mentioned this earlier. I think one of the things I think was a really big takeaway today is how much this really is institutions that are out front are the problem solvers, are the ones that are looking at the opportunities around AI and predictive analytics and machine learning to really think about how do we use some of that technology and some of those practices that are happening across the business world to be practical for us. And again, I think that really does end up being an opportunity to learn from each other like this. One of the things that we always have a lot of at the SEM conference is a variety of those vendors. So in addition to the demo day that we have coming up in October, again, a number of our AI vendors will be with us at SEM. But the other one that I would call out is a reminder that, SEM consulting and ACRO consulting can really be part of that solution too, to really help you think about, what are some of those problems that you're trying to solve, and how do you start to go down a path towards opportunities. So we've got a couple of minutes. I haven't seen any questions come through the chat, but if you have questions, Please jump in or post those to the chat now. I'll ask our panel to answer those before we wrap up. But again, hope you all got a lot out of today's information. This was, again, meant to be a bit of a primer on AI and machine learning, but more than anything, it was an opportunity for you to be able to think about what are the things that you want to learn more about. You saw some really great previews of some sessions that are coming up for SEM. As a reminder, SEM is coming up November 3rd through 6th. We're in Boston this year. It is a great opportunity to be able to learn more about enrollment management, but there's also a series of themes through the conference. So obviously there's a really strong presence of AI use in SIM. There's another long set of programs around women in SIM and really growing that next generation of women leaders. But we also have an opportunity in a pre-conference workshop to talk about leveraging finances related to enrollment management. So some of those institutions that are doing things like really managing what is your in-state, out-of-state balance, what is your international balance, what is the right amount of discounting. There's some really good work that we're going to be doing in one of the workshops there as well. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope to see you in Boston. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.